My fiancée slept with my best friend while I paid for everything, so I vanished without warning, and what happened next shattered their lives. I'm a 29-year-old guy who believed love meant sacrifice, and I proudly took on every bill, every rent payment, and every temporary expense my fiancée promised she'd repay someday. I told myself that struggle was just the price of building a future together, even when my chest felt tight watching my savings quietly bleed away. Her voice was always soft when she thanked me, but the gratitude felt rehearsed, like a script she knew I'd fall for. My entire identity slowly wrapped itself around being the reliable provider, the man who never complained and always fixed everything. I remember coming home exhausted, the air stale with leftover perfume and the faint glow of her phone lighting up the ceiling. "You're my rock," she whispered once, pressing a kiss to my cheek, and I swallowed the quiet voice inside me that asked why rocks always cracked under pressure. My best friend was always there too, lounging on our couch like he belonged in the center of our life. "Relax, you're overthinking," she laughed when my eyes lingered just a second too long on their shared smiles. He clapped my shoulder and said, "You know I've got your back, right?" And I nodded, forcing a grin while unease curdled in my stomach. I watched my own needs shrink into whispers while her demands grew louder, wrapped in charm and fragile promises. I told myself this was devotion, that loyalty meant silence and strength meant endurance. But some nights, as I lay awake listening to their murmured laughter drift through the hallway, a cold question curled around my heart and refused to let me rest. I stared at the ceiling, tracing tiny cracks in the paint and wondering why love started to feel like a quiet negotiation where I always lost. "Everything's fine," she murmured from the other side of the bed, her hand brushing mine without warmth, and I pretended to believe it, even as the space between us felt wider than any argument we'd ever had. I started noticing the small changes, the way you notice a smell in the air before a storm, faint but impossible to ignore. Her phone never left her side anymore, always face down, always buzzing at odd hours. When I'd glance over, she'd tilt the screen away and smile too quickly, like I was a child asking questions I wasn't allowed to understand. "It's just work stuff," she said, her tone light, but her eyes never quite met mine. My best friend somehow became a permanent fixture in our home, his laughter echoing off the walls long after midnight. The scent of his cologne mixed with the warm aroma of the takeout I'd paid for, filling the room with a strange intimacy that didn't include me. "You've been so busy lately," he joked one evening, nudging her playfully, "so I'm just keeping her company." She smiled at him in a way that felt softer than the smile she saved for me. Inside, something twisted. A cold knot formed behind my ribs, tightening every time I caught them exchanging glances or quiet jokes. "You're imagining things," I whispered to myself, even as my hands trembled folding the laundry I'd stayed up to finish. I didn't want to be the insecure guy, the one who ruined everything with suspicion. I wanted to be the man who trusted, the man who believed. "Why do you look so serious?" she teased, brushing past me in the hallway, her fingertips cool and distant. "You know I love you, right?" I nodded, forcing a weak smile, even though the words felt thinner each time she said them. Her affection started to feel like a performance, a show staged just to keep me calm. At night, when the apartment grew quiet, I'd lie there and replay every moment, every laugh, every secretive glance, wondering when things stopped feeling safe. And as another notification lit up her screen in the dark, her face turning away from mine, I felt a slow, sinking realization creeping in, something was already slipping out of my control. This happened when I was 29, when trust started feeling less like love and more like a slow, deliberate lie I was forcing myself to believe. The nights stretched longer, and the excuses grew thinner, like fabric worn to the edge of tearing. She would vanish for hours, claiming urgent errands or last-minute plans, her voice too casual, too rehearsed, while my mind stitched together scenarios I refused to face. I remember standing in the kitchen, the cold tiles biting into my bare feet, as her laughter drifted through the half-closed door of the living room. It wasn't the laughter she shared with me anymore. It was quieter, more intimate, like a secret language I didn't understand. "You're being paranoid," she snapped when I finally asked, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Stop making everything weird." My best friend crossed his arms and scoffed, "Man, you've changed. You never used to be this possessive." The word hit me like a slap, possessive, as if caring was a crime. Inside, shame tangled with fear, and I hated myself for questioning the two people I trusted most. I told myself I was just tired, worn down by work, by pressure, by my own insecurities. But then I saw it, the way she smiled at him when she thought I wasn't looking, the way their eyes lingered too long, the subtle brush of fingertips that lingered just a second too much. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. "You're overthinking again," she sighed, turning away, her scent trailing behind her like a bittersweet reminder of everything I was losing. Late one night, her phone buzzed on the bedside table while she showered, the bright screen casting thin light across the dark room. A name flashed across it, his name, followed by a message she'd forgotten to silence. My fingers hovered, shaking, as guilt and dread warred inside me. I told myself not to look, that trust meant restraint, that love meant faith. But as the screen glowed between my hands and her footsteps echoed closer down the hallway, I realized some truths don't wait for permission to reveal themselves, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what I was about to see. I'm 29, and that was the moment when the subtle unease I'd been ignoring started to become undeniable reality. One evening, I overheard a conversation that should never have reached my ears. They were whispering in the kitchen, voices low, but the words pierced straight through the walls of denial I had built around myself. "He'll never know," she laughed softly, a sound that used to make my chest warm, now slicing through me like glass. My best friend's chuckle followed hers, casual and too comfortable, a sound that made my stomach twist. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart hammering, tasting bile at the back of my throat. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume mingled with his cologne, a combination that now made my skin crawl instead of relax. Every instinct screamed at me to intervene, to demand answers, but my lips stayed sealed. There was a cold, hollow part of me that knew it was only the beginning, that this was the first thread unraveling a tapestry I thought was love. When I confronted her later, my voice shaky, she tilted her head in feigned innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, eyes glimmering with a practiced mix of guilt and deflection. I wanted to believe her, to convince myself that I was imagining things, but the knot in my chest only tightened. He, too, seemed to sense the danger. His usual casual confidence faltered slightly, and I saw the tiniest flicker of unease in his eyes. But there was still arrogance there, a smugness that whispered, they knew more than I did, and they weren't afraid. I spent the night lying awake, replaying their laughter, their whispered promises, the way my fiancée looked at him differently than she ever looked at me. The apartment felt colder than usual, the shadows longer, and I realized I had crossed the line from doubt into certainty. Something had shifted irreversibly, and I had no idea how I would survive the truth that was creeping closer, ready to strike. I'm 29, and the moment I found out still burns in my mind, a memory etched in disbelief and raw, twisting pain. I didn't stumble upon vague hints this time, I found undeniable proof. Her laptop, left open carelessly while she stepped out, displayed messages that didn't even try to hide the truth anymore. My best friend's name, intertwined with hers in flirtations, plans, and cruel jokes about me, glared at me from the screen. My hands shook so violently I could barely close the laptop, but I couldn't look away. Every word felt like a dagger twisting deeper, each one confirming everything my gut had been screaming for months. I remember the sickening mixture of nausea and rage that hit me like a tidal wave. The apartment smelled of stale takeout, and the faint hum of the refrigerator seemed louder, as if mocking me with its indifference. I could almost hear the echo of their laughter from the night before, soft and intimate, and it made my chest ache in ways I couldn't even describe. You're both disgusting," I finally managed to mutter aloud, my voice hoarse and trembling. There was no denial, no excuses, just the bitter, jagged truth staring back at me. She came back then, stepping into the apartment with her usual carefree smile, completely unaware that her carefully built illusion had already shattered. "Hey, what's wrong?" she asked, leaning against the counter, eyes flicking briefly to the laptop. I held up the screen, the messages glaring like a neon sign I wished I could unsee. The smirk that once warmed my heart now made it collapse. And then he appeared, oblivious to the storm, casual as ever, joking about something trivial as if the past months of lies were nothing. I could feel my body trembling, a mix of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak colliding inside me. The room felt too small, the air too thick, and I realized in that instant that everything I believed in had been a lie. I wanted to scream, to cry, to destroy something, but all I could do was stand there, staring at them, my world collapsing silently around me. And just like that, the life I thought I had built for love turned into a house of cards ready to crumble, and I didn't know if I had the strength to hold the pieces together. I'm 29, and just when I thought the betrayal couldn't get any deeper, I discovered something that made my stomach drop and my blood run cold. It wasn't just emotional, it was calculated. I found messages between them that revealed a plan, carefully crafted over months, to drain me financially before they moved in together. Every "I love you" I had heard, every promise she made about paying me back, every friendly gesture from him, it had been part of their scheme. I felt a wave of nausea, the kitchen spinning around me as I read their words, realizing the depth of their deceit. I remember pacing the apartment, the floor cold beneath my feet, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening in my ears. They can't be serious, I whispered to myself, clutching my phone like it was both a weapon and a lifeline. But the more I read, the more I understood that my trust had been weaponized against me. They had mocked my loyalty in private, laughed about my naivety, and meticulously mapped out how to take everything I had earned. When she walked in that evening, humming softly, the casual warmth she usually carried felt like a cruel joke. "You look stressed," she said, brushing past me with a perfumed smile, completely oblivious, or pretending to be, to what I had just uncovered. I clenched my fists, tasting iron on my tongue, fighting the urge to throw something, anything. His message came through that night as well, filled with arrogance and certainty. "Don't worry, it's almost done. He doesn't suspect a thing." I froze, staring at the screen as the reality settled in. This wasn't just a moment of infidelity, it was an orchestrated manipulation, a trap disguised as friendship and love. And at that moment, a strange calm washed over me, the kind that comes when the shock finally sets in. I realized that everything I thought I knew, every ounce of trust one had been a lie, but I wasn't going to let it break me completely, yet. Something had to change, and I knew the next steps would decide everything. I'm 29, and after discovering their secret plan, I realized the only power I had left was the one they hadn't anticipated: leaving. I began preparing quietly, severing digital ties, closing accounts, and slowly erasing the traces of my life from their reach. Every item packed, every step taken, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had lost in their deception. The apartment, once filled with laughter and warmth, now smelled faintly of their lingering arrogance and betrayal, a reminder of everything I was walking away from. I watched from a distance as they continued their routines, oblivious to the void I was creating. The air outside felt crisp, sharp against my lungs. As I moved silently, each step weighted with determination and rage. For weeks, I left no messages, no clues, just vanished, letting the absence speak louder than confrontation ever could. Their world, built on my loyalty and financial support, began to wobble in subtle, unnoticeable ways at first. "Where did he go?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she searched my last known locations. I could imagine her pacing the apartment, the hum of her panic replacing the laughter that once echoed through the rooms. I felt a strange satisfaction imagining him texting her, confused and angry, realizing the safety net they had exploited for months was gone. Even he, my so-called best friend, began to show cracks. I pictured him nervously checking his phone, pretending casual confidence while panic nibbled at his edges. The absence was a blade cutting through their sense of control, and I savored the thought in silence. At night, I found a quiet corner far from everything familiar, feeling the air differently, tasting freedom like it had been withheld my entire life. But despite the relief, my chest still ached with betrayal, and I knew this was only the beginning. They didn't yet understand the storm they had set in motion, and the reckoning waiting just beyond the horizon. I'm 29, and from my distance, I watched the consequences of their betrayal start to unravel like a thread pulled too hard. Their relationship, once shielded by my support and silence, began to crack under financial strain and mounting tension. The apartment felt smaller without me there, their laughter gone, replaced by arguments and whispered accusations. I could almost hear her voice, sharp and desperate, "You're never here to help." And his, defensive and biting, "It's not my fault, she's blowing this out of proportion." The reality I had left them in was harsh, immediate, and unstoppable. I imagined their favorite restaurants slipping out of reach, bills piling up, phone calls from creditors growing more insistent. Every misstep they took, every forgotten payment, every frustrated glance between them became a mirror of the lies they had spun so carelessly. I felt a bittersweet mix of triumph and lingering hurt, the weight of months of manipulation finally turning against them. I recalled the nights when I had stayed up late, paying for everything, silently hoping they would appreciate the sacrifices I made. Now, those sacrifices had become the foundation of their downfall, a truth they had never anticipated. Their laughter, once warm and intimate, was replaced by tension so thick it seemed to cling to the walls. I pictured her pacing, phone in hand, checking messages, trying to reach me, her fingers trembling with panic. He ranted, blaming her, blaming the world, but the absence of my presence was the quiet verdict neither of them could escape. Even as I observed silently, the apartment around them became suffocating. Shadows seemed longer, the air heavier, and the reality of what they had lost slowly set in. And in that darkness, I realized the most devastating part hadn't yet happened, the real collapse was still coming, one neither of them could see coming. I'm 29, and by now, I could almost feel the weight of their desperation from miles away. Their world, once built on my trust and their schemes, had turned into a cage lined with tension, shame, and panic. She called incessantly, her voice cracking each time she realized I wasn't going to answer. "Please, just talk to me," I imagined her whispering into the empty phone, the desperation in her tone raw and unfiltered. He, too, was unraveling, pacing the apartment, slamming doors, muttering curses under his breath, realizing that the safety net they had relied on was gone. The apartment I once called home became a stage for their collapse. Bills went unpaid, services cut off, and their social facades crumbled. Friends and family noticed, asked questions, but neither could salvage the pride they had lost. I could almost smell the tension in the air, bitter and sharp, mingling with the faint scent of takeout from meals they no longer had money to order. Every argument they had seemed louder, more desperate, a constant reminder of the world they had destroyed with their own hands. I replayed the months of lies in my mind, the way they had laughed at my loyalty and my heart, thinking they could manipulate everything without consequence. Now, the tables had turned. I felt a cold satisfaction as I watched their carefully constructed lives teeter on the edge. Her face, once radiant with control, now carried panic lines I had never seen. His bravado was gone, replaced by fear, the same arrogance that had tormented me now hollowed out. I realized this was their rock-bottom moment, the point where the consequences of their betrayal fully collided with reality. And even though I remained distant and silent, a small, quiet part of me knew the reckoning wasn't over. The worst was still coming, the final confrontation looming like a storm neither of them would survive unscathed. I'm 29, and after weeks of watching from the shadows, I finally decided it was time to reappear. I walked back into their lives with calm precision, my presence carrying a weight they hadn't felt in months. The apartment, once a place of laughter and betrayal, now felt smaller under my silent gaze. They froze when they saw me, eyes wide, mouths opening, closing, unsure of how to react. You're here," she stammered, voice trembling, the confident mask she wore for so long crumbling instantly. I didn't say much at first, letting the silence stretch between us like a taut wire. The air was thick with tension, the faint scent of her perfume sharp against my senses, and the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. "Do you know what I found?" I finally asked, my voice low, controlled, each word deliberate. Their guilty glances and shifting eyes told me everything I needed to know. He tried to laugh it off, a hollow attempt to regain composure. We didn't mean," he started, but the words faltered under the weight of my stare. I could see panic creeping into him, the arrogance that had once fueled his audacity now replaced by dread. "I trusted you. I supported you. I paid for everything while you plotted behind my back," I continued, letting the truth settle in the room like smoke. Every lie they had spun, every laugh at my expense, every whispered secret, it was all laid bare. Her knees wobbled as she sank slightly, the reality of exposure hitting her like a physical blow. The power in the room had shifted entirely, the predator now confronted by the one they had underestimated. I could feel the emotional dominance replacing the hurt I had carried for months, a calm satisfaction mingling with the storm of betrayal. And as they stood there, broken, the apartment silent except for the weight of truth, I realized this confrontation was only the beginning. The reckoning had truly begun, and neither of them would leave unscathed. I'm 29, and by now, the tension in the room had become almost unbearable. They were both standing there, faces pale, eyes darting, unable to hide the panic that had settled in their chests. "Please, we can fix this," she whispered, voice cracking, reaching out as if her touch could undo months of deceit. He muttered under his breath, muttering excuses and half-hearted justifications, but neither could mask the fear creeping into their features. I watched them crumble, realizing how deeply their arrogance had blinded them. Every manipulation, every lie, every secret plan, they had built it all on my trust, and now it was collapsing before them. The apartment, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and suffocating, shadows stretching longer as their world unraveled. "You think you can just take from me and get away with it?" I said, my voice calm but edged with ice. Their eyes widened, the realization hitting that their games had finally ended. I laid out everything I had seen, every message, every whispered joke, every plot they had tried to hide. The weight of truth hung heavy, smothering any remaining arrogance. I could feel a strange sense of power rising within me, not from cruelty, but from finally reclaiming control. "You've destroyed yourselves," I added, watching the panic deepen, "not me." They began blaming each other, voices raising in desperation, but the cracks between them had grown too wide to repair. As I turned to leave, I saw the full scope of their ruin, the relationship poisoned, their trust in each other shattered, their carefully constructed lives exposed. I felt a mix of relief and vindication, the culmination of months of silent observation and patience. And as I stepped out into the night, leaving them to face the consequences they had earned, I realized that the final breakdown wasn't just theirs, it was the moment I reclaimed my own life, unshackled from betrayal and fully in control of my future. I'm 29, and walking away became the most powerful decision I've ever made. The air outside felt different, crisp and untainted, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension I had left behind. For the first time in months, maybe years, I breathed without the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. Each step away from the apartment, from their lies, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had forgotten existed. I started rebuilding quietly, focusing on my own life, my own stability. No one to deceive me, no one to manipulate my loyalty for their gain. I could feel the calm strength growing inside me, like roots anchoring me firmly after being tossed by storms I hadn't anticipated. I reflected on the months of betrayal, the hidden smiles, the whispered secrets, the calculated plans, and realized how far I had come just by choosing silence over confrontation, observation over impulsive rage. Even the memories of their panic, the collapse of their arrogance, no longer haunted me, they became proof of my resilience. I smiled at the thought, a quiet, steady smile, knowing I had emerged whole. The lessons burned in me, sharper than any anger or grief, teaching me boundaries, self-respect, and the price of trust misplaced. I found peace in the simplicity of my own routine, cooking my own meals, walking alone through quiet streets, savoring moments of solitude that felt like freedom. Each day reminded me that power wasn't always loud, sometimes it was the quiet act of reclaiming your own life. And though the story of their betrayal still lingered in the corners of my mind, it no longer had the power to control me. I had walked away, vanished when they least expected it, and in doing so, shattered the illusion they had built, and in that silence, I found the unexpected victory and healing I never thought possible. The chapter closed not with chaos, but with clarity, and for the first time, I truly felt free, knowing that my life was mine again, unbroken, and stronger than ever.